In a small, quiet town surrounded by rolling hills and thick forests, life moved at its own unhurried pace. People knew each other by name, kids played safely in the streets, and evenings were spent sipping coffee on porches as the sun dipped below the horizon. This was a place where nothing much ever happened until it did. Aaron Hayes lived an ordinary life here, fixing cars at his modest garage during the day and spending time with his daughter after work. His teenage girl was the light of his world. She had big dreams of becoming an artist who could capture emotions with her brushstrokes. Her room was filled with sketches, paintings, and half-finished projects that spoke volumes about her creativity. Aaron loved watching her grow into someone so full of passion and hope, but one night everything changed. It started like any other Friday evening. The two of them shared dinner, laughed over silly jokes, and talked about their weekend plans. Then she left for a school dance, promising to be back before midnight. But midnight came and went, and she didn't return. Aaron tried calling her phone, but there was no answer. At first, he told himself not to panic. Maybe her phone died, or maybe she lost track of time chatting with friends. But as the hours dragged on, worry turned into dread. By morning, Aaron couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut anymore. He called the local police, filed a missing person report, and began driving around town, checking every spot she might have gone. Days passed, and still there was no sign of her. Flyers went up all over town, pleading for information, but nobody seemed to know anything. The whole community joined in the search, but it felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. Then, one chilly afternoon, the call came, the kind of call every parent dreads. They found her body dumped near the edge of the forest, miles away from where she should have been. The news hit Aaron like a freight train. For days he couldn't eat, sleep, or even think straight. His heart shattered into pieces he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to put back together. The investigation revealed grim details. She hadn't wandered off or gotten lost. Someone had taken her, a group of criminals known for preying on young people. These weren't just petty thieves. They were dangerous individuals involved in drugs, violence, and worse. They lured vulnerable teens with promises of quick cash or excitement, only to discard them when they were no longer useful. And now, Aaron's precious child was gone because of them. As the initial shock wore off, anger began to take root inside him. How could this happen? Why didn't anyone stop these monsters sooner? Every unanswered question fueled his rage. He attended meetings with detectives, demanding answers and updates, but progress was slow. Leads dried up, evidence led nowhere, and it seemed like the case would go cold before justice could be served. What the authorities didn't know, and what Aaron kept buried deep within himself, was that he wasn't always a mechanic. Before settling down in this sleepy town, he'd led a very different life. Years ago, he'd been part of a highly secretive military unit trained for stealth missions. His job was to eliminate high-value targets silently and efficiently, leaving no trace behind. It was a brutal, unforgiving world, and he'd walked away from it when he decided to start a family. He wanted a normal life, far removed from the darkness he once embraced. But now, with his daughter gone and the system failing him, that old life began creeping back. Memories of training exercises, tactical maneuvers, and silent kills flooded. His mind, skills he thought he'd forgotten, resurfaced, sharpened by grief and desperation. Aaron realized he couldn't sit idly by while the people responsible roamed free. If the law wouldn't bring them to justice, then he would have to do it himself. At first, the idea terrified him. Could he really go back to that life? Was he willing to risk everything, even his humanity, for revenge? But the image of his daughter's smiling face kept haunting him. He remembered how she used to laugh, how her eyes lit up when she talked about her future. Those memories became his anchor, pulling him forward despite the fear gnawing at him. So, under the cover of darkness, Aaron began preparing. He dusted off old gear stored away in the attic, practiced moving silently through the woods, and reacquainted himself with weapons he hadn't touched in years. By day he played the role of A grieving father, attending counseling sessions and participating in community vigils. But by night, he transformed into something else entirely, a shadowy figure stalking those who had stolen his child. His mission wasn't reckless vengeance. It was calculated justice. Aaron knew he couldn't afford mistakes. If he got caught, it wouldn't just ruin his chances of getting close to the criminals. It would destroy any hope of bringing them down. So he worked methodically, gathering intelligence bit by bit. He hacked into security cameras, tapped phone lines, and mapped out the gang's movements without leaving a single clue behind. Every step brought him closer to the truth, and closer to the men responsible for his daughter's death. With each new piece of information, his resolve hardened. He wasn't just doing this for closure anymore. He was doing it because he owed it to his daughter to make sure her voice wasn't silenced forever. As the days turned into weeks, Aaron's transformation became complete. On the surface, he was still the same man everyone in town knew, a grieving father trying to hold himself together. He attended support group meetings where others shared their pain, nodded along when counselors offered advice, and accepted hugs from neighbors who didn't know what else to say. But beneath that facade, something darker had awakened. The grief he felt hadn't faded. If anything, it burned brighter than ever. It fueled him, sharpened his focus, and pushed him deeper into a world most people couldn't even imagine. By day, Aaron played the role of a broken man. He went through the motions fixing cars at his garage, running errands, and visiting Emily's grave whenever he needed strength. But by night he became someone else entirely, someone silent, precise, and relentless. His old skills, once buried under years of ordinary life, now flowed back like muscle memory. Moving through the shadows, he began piecing together the puzzle of who had taken his daughter. The first thing Aaron did was gather information. He started small, eavesdropping on conversations at local hangouts where troublemakers often gathered. Bars with flickering neon signs, dimly lit alleys behind convenience stores, and late-night diners frequented by shady characters all became places he studied closely. He learned how to blend in without drawing attention, sitting quietly in corners while keeping an ear out for whispers about the gang. Slowly, names and patterns emerged. There were 6 or 7 key players, each more dangerous than the last, but one stood out above the rest, the leader. This person wasn't just calling the shots, they were the heart of the operation. The reason it kept running smoothly despite its violent reputation, Aaron knew he couldn't take them all down at once. That would be reckless and likely end in failure. Instead, he decided to work his way up the chain, targeting those on the edges first. These were the low-level enforcers, the ones who carried out orders without asking questions. They weren't as careful as their boss, leaving behind clues that made them easy to track. Aaron followed them home, mapped their routines, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. His approach was calculated. He didn't use guns too loud, too messy. Instead, he relied on tools that left no trace: a knife, wire, and his own 2 hands. Each move was deliberate, every action planned down to the smallest detail. He struck only when absolutely necessary, ensuring there were no witnesses and no evidence tying him to the scene. When it was over, he disappeared back into the night, leaving nothing but silence behind. But what Aaron didn't realize was that his actions were starting to attract attention not just from the gang, but from law enforcement too. Bodies began turning up in abandoned buildings, alleyways, and empty lots. At first, the police dismissed them as random acts of violence, typical of the kind of chaos gangs brought to a town. But then patterns started emerging. The victims all belonged to the same crew, and each death bore the hallmark of precision and skill. Whoever was responsible wasn't just angry, they were trained. Detective Lavra Mendez was the first to notice something unusual. A seasoned investigator with years of experience under her belt, she had a knack for spotting details others missed. As she reviewed case files and crime scene photos, she couldn't shake the feeling that these killings weren't random. They were too clean, too efficient. Whoever was behind them knew exactly what they were doing. And when she cross-referenced the timeline of events with reports of missing gang members, Her suspicions grew stronger. It didn't take long for her to connect the dots back to Aaron Hayes. She remembered seeing him at the station during the early days of the investigation, his face pale and drawn, his voice trembling as he begged for answers. Back then, she'd felt sympathy for him, a father desperate to find justice for his child. But now, looking at him through fresh eyes, she saw something different. There was a calmness about him, a quiet intensity that seemed out of place for someone supposedly shattered by a lost. Lavra dug deeper, pulling security footage from areas near the crime scenes. What she found sent chills down her spine. In grainy black and white images, she spotted a figure moving through the shadows, always hooded, always careful to stay out of direct view. The build matched Aaron's, and the timing lined up perfectly with the murders. It was circumstantial evidence, sure, but enough to warrant further investigation. Meanwhile, Aaron remained oblivious to the growing scrutiny. He was too focused on his mission to notice anything else. With each successful takedown, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Satisfaction because he was getting closer to the truth, closer to the person who had ordered Emily's abduction. Emptiness because none of it brought her back. No matter how many criminals he eliminated, the ache in his chest never went away. Still, he pressed on. The gang was growing nervous, their usual bravado replaced by paranoia. Whispers spread among them about a ghost picking them off one by one. Some suggested it was a rival crew trying to muscle in on their territory. Others thought it might be an inside job, a traitor among their ranks. Nobody suspected a grieving father working alone in the dead of night. Aaron's next target was a mid-level operative, a man who acted as the gang's messenger, ferrying orders between the leader and the foot soldiers. If Aaron could get close enough to this guy, he might finally uncover the identity of the mastermind. Tracking him proved tricky, though. Unlike the lower-level thugs, this operative was cautious, sticking to well-lit areas and rarely traveling alone. Aaron spent days observing him, memorizing his schedule and identifying weak points in his routine. Finally, the opportunity presented itself. One evening, the operative stepped out of a bar alone, lighting a cigarette as he walked toward his car. Aaron watched from across the street, hidden in the shadows. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear but from anticipation. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. Silently, he crossed the road, closing the distance between them with practiced ease. Before the man could react, Aaron was on him, his movements swift and precise. Within seconds, it was over. Searching the man's pockets, Aaron found what he was looking for, a burner phone filled with text messages detailing recent operations. Among them was a name and an address. For the first time since Emily's death, Aaron allowed himself a flicker of hope. He was closer than ever to finding the person responsible, closer to making them pay. But as he slipped away into the darkness, unaware of the storm brewing around him, Detective Laura Mendez was already assembling her team. Evidence was mounting, and soon they'd have no choice but to confront the man they believed was behind the killings. Aaron's carefully constructed world was about to collide with theirs, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The night air was heavy with the scent of rain as Aaron slipped through the shadows, his movements silent and deliberate. The burner phone he'd taken from the mid-level operative felt like a ticking clock in his pocket. He knew it held information that could lead him to the person at the top, the one pulling all the strings. But decoding its contents wasn't going to be easy. It was encrypted, filled with coded messages and shorthand only someone inside the gang would understand. Still, Aaron had spent years mastering the art of patience, and he wasn't about to let frustration get the better of him. Back at his makeshift hideout, a dusty corner of his garage hidden behind stacks of old car parts, he spread the evidence across a workbench. Maps, notes scribbled on scraps of paper, and screenshots of text messages formed a chaotic mosaic. Each piece told part of the story, but putting it all together required focus. Aaron pored over the data late into the night, cross-referencing locations and piecing together patterns. His mind worked like a machine, filtering out irrelevant details until clarity emerged. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. The gang's leader wasn't just some thug running a drug ring. They were methodical, organized, and ruthless. Every operation they ran followed a precise plan, executed without hesitation or error. They didn't leave loose ends, which meant anyone who crossed them disappeared permanently, including Emily. Aaron clenched his fists as anger surged through him again. But this time it wasn't blind rage. It was cold, calculated fury, the kind that sharpened his resolve instead of clouding his judgment. He realized now why the police had struggled to make progress. This wasn't your average street gang. It was a well-oiled machine designed to evade capture. And if Aaron wanted to bring it down, he'd need to dismantle it piece by piece. Meanwhile, Detective LeVar Mendez was closing in. The evidence against Aaron was mounting faster than she'd expected. Security footage placed him near multiple crime scenes, always lurking in the background, always vanishing before anything happened. Witnesses described seeing a hooded figure matching his description around the same times and places where bodies turned up. Even more damning were the whispers spreading among the remaining gang members. Some claimed they'd seen their fallen comrades being taken down by someone who moved like a ghost. Others swore they recognized Aaron's face from grainy stills, pulled from surveillance videos. Lavra couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Everything pointed to Aaron Haysnot as a grieving father seeking justice, but as a man driven by something far darker. She wrestled with the idea, trying to reconcile the broken man she'd met weeks earlier with the skilled killer her investigation suggested he was. Was it possible? Could a regular guy like Aaron have the training and the stomach to carry out such brutal acts? Her instincts screamed yes. There was something about him, something quiet and controlled, that hinted at a past most people wouldn't suspect. She remembered how calm he'd been during their initial interviews, how steady his gaze remained even when talking about his daughter's death. Most grieving parents unraveled under pressure, their emotions spilling out uncontrollably. But Aaron? He was different, too composed too. Prepared? Determined to get answers, LeVar assembled a team and began staking out Aaron's house. They watched him come and go, noting his routines and looking for any slip-ups. At first, nothing seemed unusual. During the day, he worked at his garage, chatting with customers and tinkering with engines like any other mechanic. But at night, things changed. He left the house long after everyone else had gone to bed, returning hours later with dirt on his boots and a distant look in his eyes. It was subtle, but to someone trained to notice such things, it was enough. One evening, as Aaron returned home after another late-night recon mission, he sensed something was off. The streetlights cast long shadows across his driveway, and the air felt heavier than usual. As he parked his truck and stepped outside, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Years of training kicked in, and he scanned the area instinctively. That's when he saw them 4 squad cars parked haphazardly along the curb, their lights flashing silently in the darkness. For a split second, Aaron froze. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear but from the sudden realization that his cover might be blown. He glanced around, weighing his options. Could he fight his way out? Maybe, but doing so would only confirm their suspicions and put innocent lives at risk. Instead, he took a deep breath, raised his hands slowly, and stepped forward. Come. Out with your hands where we can see them. A voice barked through a megaphone. Lavra stood at the front of the group, her expression unreadable. Behind her, officers shifted nervously, their weapons drawn but uncertain whether they'd actually need to use them. Aaron locked eyes with Lavara, searching for any sign of doubt. There was none. She believed he was guilty. As he approached, hands still raised, Aaron spoke calmly. I don't know what this is about, but you're making a mistake. We'll see about that, Lavara replied, her tone firm. Without another word, she signaled for the officers to cuff him and escort him to a waiting patrol car. Neighbors peered out of windows, whispering to each other as the scene unfolded. Aaron kept his head down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Inside, his mind raced. How much did they know? Had they found the burner phone? Or was this just a fishing expedition? At the station, Aaron was led into an interrogation room and left alone for what felt like hours. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the table. Finally, Lavra entered, carrying a thick folder stuffed with documents. She sat down across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "You've been busy, haven't you?" she began, sliding photos across the table. Crime scene images stared back at Aaron, stark reminders of the path he'd chosen. "These men all connected to the gang responsible for your daughter's death. And you've been spotted near every single location where their bodies were found." Aaron said nothing, his face unreadable. He knew better than to give anything. Away. Lavra leaned forward, her voice softening slightly. "Look, I get it, you lost someone you loved. We all want justice for her. But this isn't the way. Whatever you're doing, whoever you're targeting, it's not going to bring her back." Aaron's jaw tightened. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, the truth about his past, the skills he'd buried, the lengths he'd gone to in order to track down the people who had destroyed his life. But he stopped himself. Trusting her, or anyone, wasn't an option. Not yet. Instead, he met her gaze steadily. "If you think I'm involved in this, prove it. Until then, I've got nothing to say." Lavra sighed, leaning back in her chair. She'd expected resistance, but there was something unnerving about the way Aaron carried himself. It wasn't arrogance or defiance, it was confidence. The kind that came from knowing you were untouchable. Hours passed as she grilled him, laying out every shred of evidence they had. Surveillance footage, witness statements, even fragments of the burner phone's data they'd managed to recover. But Aaron remained silent, offering no explanations, no denials. By the time the interrogation ended, Lavra was exhausted and more convinced than ever that they were dealing with someone far beyond ordinary. As dawn broke, Aaron was locked in a holding cell, his thoughts swirling. He knew he couldn't stay. Here, the gang's leader was still out there, orchestrating chaos and destruction. If Aaron didn't act soon, more lives would be lost, including potentially his own. But escaping wouldn't be easy. Guards patrolled the halls, cameras monitored every corner, and Laura's team was determined to break him. Yet, despite the odds stacked against him, Aaron allowed himself a small smile. He'd faced worse situations before, and he'd always found a way out. This time wouldn't be any different. All he needed was patience and the perfect opportunity. The abandoned warehouse sat on the outskirts of town, a crumbling relic of better days. Its rusted metal walls groaned in the wind, and broken windows stared out like hollow eyes. Inside, shadows danced across the floor as flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was the perfect place for a trap remote, desolate and easy to monitor. For Aaron Hayes, it was also the stage for his final act. As he stepped out of the car that had brought him there, Aaron took a moment to steady himself. The weight of everything rested on his shoulders, the grief, the anger, the countless sleepless nights spent hunting monsters in the dark. Now all roads led here. He glanced around at the empty streets, knowing Lavra Mendez and her team were hidden somewhere nearby, watching every move he made. But once he crossed the threshold into the warehouse, he'd be alone. Just him and the people who had taken everything from him. He walked inside, his boots crunching softly against the concrete floor. The air smelled of mildew and oil, thick enough to taste. A table stood in the center of the room, surrounded by folding chairs. On it lay a briefcase filled with fake cash props meant to sell the illusion of an arms deal. Aaron had suggested using real weapons, but Lavra insisted on keeping things non-lethal. "We're not letting this escalate further than it has to," she'd said firmly. Reluctantly, Aaron agreed. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Then the sound of engines roared in the distance. Headlights pierced through the darkness outside, and soon 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt just beyond the entrance. Doors opened and men poured out, their faces masked and their hands gripping guns. They moved with practiced precision, scanning the area before filing inside. At their center was the man Aaron had been hunting, the gang's leader, the boss. was shorter than Aaron expected, wiry but sharp-eyed, with an aura of authority that commanded respect without words. His gaze swept over the room, lingering briefly on Aaron before settling on the briefcase. "You're late," he growled, his voice low and gravelly. "Traffic," Aaron replied simply, his tone neutral. Inside, his heart thundered, but outwardly, he remained calm. Years of training had taught him how to control his breathing, his movements, even his thoughts. Panic wouldn't help him now. The leader gestured for two of his men to inspect the briefcase while the rest fanned out, securing the perimeter. Aaron watched silently as they opened it, rifling through stacks of counterfeit bills. One of them nodded toward the boss, signaling approval. Satisfied, the leader turned back to Aaron. "Where's the merchandise?" Aaron shrugged, feigning casualness. "Not here yet, my guy got held up. Should be arriving any minute." For a split second, doubt flickered across the leader's face, but then he smirked, shaking his head. "Typical. Always something with you amateurs." He pulled out a phone and capped a message, likely summoning reinforcements. Aaron didn't flinch. He knew this was part of the game, testing patience, probing for weaknesses. If he showed even a hint of fear, it would tip them off. Time seemed too slow as the standoff continued. Aaron kept his focus razor-sharp, memorizing every detail, the positions of the guards, the exits, the way the leader carried himself. These weren't random thugs, they were professionals, disciplined and deadly. Underestimating them would be fatal. But Aaron had faced worse odds before, and he trusted his instincts. Suddenly, the sound of tires squealing echoed outside. Reinforcements had arrived, but instead of rushing in, they stayed put, waiting for orders. The leader barked something into his radio, his tone growing impatient. That's when Aaron noticed a faint shimmer of light reflecting off glass high above. Laura's team was in position, ready to strike. All he needed to do was buy them a little more time. "I don't like being kept waiting." The leader snapped, stepping closer to Aaron. "Tell your guy to hurry up or else." Aaron met his gaze steadily. "Or else what?" "You'll shoot." "Me? Go ahead, but if I'm dead, your deal dies with me." The leader hesitated, clearly torn between suspicion and greed. Finally, he motioned for his men to stand down. "Fine, we wait. But make no mistake, if this is a setup, you won't live long enough to regret it." Aaron nodded, masking his relief. The plan was working so far. Now came the hard part. Minutes later, chaos erupted. From above, the SWAT team descended, rappelling down ropes with weapons drawn. Flashes of red and blue strobe lights flooded the warehouse as police vehicles surrounded the building. Shouts rang out, followed by the deafening crack of gunfire. The gang scrambled to respond, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. In the confusion, Aaron seized his chance. With fluid, practiced movements, he closed the distance between himself and the leader. Before anyone could react, he disarmed the man with a swift strike, pinning him to the ground. The leader struggled, cursing and thrashing, but Aaron held firm, pressing a knee into his back until he stopped moving. By the time officers stormed in, the fight was already over. Detective Laura Mendez approached cautiously, her weapon lowered but still at the ready. She looked from Aaron to the subdued leader, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" she asked. Finally, Aaron nodded, releasing his grip and standing up. "Yeah, he's all yours." Laura gave him a tight smile, though her eyes betrayed a mix of admiration and unease. "Good work. Let's get you out of here." Back at the station, the fallout began. The gang's leader was placed under arrest, along with several key members of his crew. Evidence recovered from the warehouse painted a damning picture of their crimes: drug trafficking, extortion, murder, and more. For the first time in years, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The nightmare was finally over, but for Aaron, the victory felt bittersweet. As much as he wanted to celebrate, he couldn't shake the emptiness gnawing at him. Emily was still gone, and nothing, not even justice, could bring her back. Still, he allowed himself a small measure of peace, knowing he'd done everything possible to honor her memory. Laura visited him one last time before the authorities decided his fate. She found him sitting quietly in a holding cell, staring at the wall. They're talking about witness protection, she said gently. If you cooperate fully, they might let you disappear. Start fresh somewhere new. Aaron looked up, meeting her gaze. And if I refuse? She sighed, leaning against the doorframe. Then we charge you with everything we can. Obstruction, conspiracy, maybe even accessory to murder. You know how this works? He nodded slowly, understanding the stakes. After a long pause, he spoke. I'll take the deal. But not for me, for her, Lavrov nodded, her expression softening. I figured as much. Just stay safe, all right? Weeks later, Aaron boarded a bus bound for an undisclosed location. He carried only a small bag and a single photograph of Emily tucked safely in his pocket. As the vehicle pulled away from the station, he gazed out the window, watching the town fade into the distance. Part of him wished he could stay to see the scars heal, to witness the community rebuild, but he knew better. Some ghosts never truly leave, and he was one of them. In the end, Aaron Hayes vanished, slipping into the shadows where he belonged. To the world, he became a forgotten name, a footnote in a story too messy to untangle. But to those who knew the truth, he was something else entirely, a grieving father who refused to give up, a soldier who fought his final battle not for glory, but for love. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, his daughter's laughter still echoed, reminding him that even in darkness there is light.